Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jens Heitland Show, where I interview experts from different fields to connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship. Today's guest is a thought leader on community revitalization and natural resource restoration. He's speaker and author of several books. Please welcome to the show the Director of RECONOMICS Institute, Storm Cunningham. Hello, Storm. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jens, thanks for having me on your show. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Really looking forward to explore a couple of things with you. But before we do this, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What is your story?
Well, I'm calling in from Washington, D.C. I spent most of my life involved in things that help nature in some way. That's always been my primary passion. And I'm currently, most people know me these days as the community revitalization guy. But in actual fact, I got into this whole realm of bringing places back to life more from the standpoint of nature. Back in the late 80s, there was a German scientist who was working in Jamaica, and he was inventing the world's first coral reef restoration technology. And nobody had even conceived of such a thing before, because when you think about it, coral reefs take thousands of years to accrete. And here he was talking about quickly restoring them, which sounds impossible. But he needed some divers. I'd been a diver in the military a long time ago, so I volunteered to go down for a week to help him install these experiments on the ocean floor, and saw these places that had been totally devastated coming back to vibrant, colorful life in a very short period of time. And it suddenly woke me up to the fact that we don't have to be satisfied with merely reducing the amount of new damage we do to the planet, which is what most sustainability initiatives do, reducing waste, reducing energy, reducing toxicity, reducing sprawl. And those are all great things. We do need to slow down the rate of damage that we're doing, but we're not going to have a brighter future if all we do is destroy the world at a slower rate.
Yeah.
The only way we can have a brighter future is by restoring the damage we've been doing over the last 3 centuries. So that's when it suddenly struck me that we can actually become restorative, and that businesses and communities and individual entrepreneurs can innovate what they're currently doing into more regenerative type of activities. And the fact is, right now, there's over $3 trillion a year of activity being done to restore nature, boost climate resilience, and revitalize communities. So that's my whole focus now.
How did you get from nature towards community where you're in right now?
Well, when I started writing my first book, The Restoration Economy, it was in 1996 that I started writing it. It didn't come out till 2002. I'm a rather slow writer, and I had a lot to learn since I didn't have a background in it. So I started writing it mostly focused on fishery restoration, watershed restoration, regenerative agriculture, which was just getting started back then, and ecosystem restoration, which was a whole brand new science and discipline that's now a huge, there are multi-billion-dollar ecological restoration projects going on in the world right now. All of this was quite new back then. And what I discovered in the process was that in most cases, the damage to nature was being done from the built environment, badly designed infrastructure, sprawling cities, all this sort of stuff. And so I started looking into that and realized that that was being renewed too, that in order to renew nature, we often have to renew our built environment. So we have to redesign cities. We have to innovate new ways of transporting people and sewage and water and all these sorts of things. So the book started expanding into infrastructure renewal and historic building reuse and restoration and catastrophe reconstruction and brownfields, contaminated site remediation and redevelopment. So it eventually became the restoration economy, and those 8 sectors have basically held up over the last 20 years. Most people are using those 8 sectors now as the taxonomy of the restoration economy.
Yeah. It's quite interesting when you say that you started to write 1996. I was starting my business career in 1996 and worked a lot with these topics ongoing and in different parts of where I work. So it's quite interesting that there are a couple of common things. Fascinating to see that.
Yeah, great.
So from a business context perspective, so did you work in your own organizations the whole time through this time frame where you went into restoration, or did you work in organizations and have been employed? How was that?
Well, at the time that I went down to Jamaica to work with Wilf Hilberts, that German scientist I mentioned, I had my own nonprofit organization that was focused on nature and coral reefs in particular. And when I decided to write a book, I decided from the very beginning that I really needed to learn more about the built environment, and I didn't want to go back to school. So I figured the most efficient way to do it would be to get a job where I would learn the built environment as a result of my job. So I basically, instead of paying to go to school and learn this stuff, I'd be getting paid to learn this stuff. So I got a job as the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Construction Specifications Institute, which is a technical society of about 18,000 architects and engineers and construction product manufacturers. But I knew, having been self-employed before, that I could maybe last 5 or 6 years before I went crazy in a 9-to-5 environment. So I needed an exit strategy, and decided, okay, well, a good launching pad for a new career will be a book, because being an author, automatically gives you credibility. People just assume if you've got a real book. And this was back in the days when, you couldn't just publish anything online. You had to go through regular publishers who actually took a look at whether you had anything of value. And so I decided that I'd start my exit strategy from day one. So first day on the job, I came in at 6 o'clock in the morning. I researched and wrote my book until 9 o'clock. And then at 9 o'clock, I'd start my job as Director of Strategic Initiatives at Construction Specifications Institute. And I did that for over 5 years. Come in at 6, write till 9, do my job. And so as each day went by, even though the 9-to-5 job was often frustrating, I knew that I had made more progress towards my eventual independence again and focusing on an area that I really was passionate about.
So then you finished the book and left the corporate world to go into your own business.
Yep, exactly.
How did that happen?
Well, it was kind of the usual model. It's these days, and for the last 30, 40 years at least, most people who publish a nonfiction book are looking to get into consulting and speaking as a career. That's kind of the normal three-legged stool of independence, is the credibility of a book, the money from speaking and consulting. So that's what I did. So I didn't really innovate anything from a standpoint of the business model. The innovation was that nobody had really focused before on this whole idea that there's an entire global economy that's based on all the end of life cycle stuff. I mean, up until recently, everybody just focused on the first 2 parts of the life cycle, either the new stuff, the sprawl, the resource extraction, the building of new cities, all that sort of thing, or they focused on the middle part of the life cycle, the maintenance of the built environment and conservation of what's left of the natural environment. But everybody was ignoring the end of life cycle stuff, all the stuff that starts with RE, redevelopment, regeneration, revitalization, renewal, repurposing, reconnection. And the funny thing is that that's where most of the growth is these days. And it's the most hope-inspiring, optimistic part of the economy, because every dollar that's made in the restoration economy is leaving the world in better condition.
Yeah, love that. And since then, you're basically in your own businesses and have built different businesses over time, if I understand you right.
Yeah, the newest aspect is the RECONOMICS Institute at reconomics.org, where I've gone beyond simply training and telling people about this stuff into actually certifying them to do this sort of work. I've identified the key things that almost all communities and regions and nations worldwide are missing in their revitalization and resilience efforts. And that's what we certify people to supply.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit more around the concept, what it is about, and why others should look at that as well?
Well, yeah, the sad fact is that most community revitalization and resilience efforts fail. Probably over 90% of them fail either in total or in large part. And the reason is strange. That virtually everybody in the world knows you need a process if you want to reliably produce something. Yeah, every business person knows it. Every large corporation knows it. Well, it doesn't matter whether they're producing information in the form of books or producing cars or clothing. It doesn't matter, or food. Every farmer knows it, that if you want to reliably produce something, you've got to have a process for doing it. The only people who don't seem to know that are the people who run communities and regions and nations. When they talk about revitalizing the place, there's no process. They just do a bunch of individual projects and kind of hope for the best, hope that if they do a lot of good stuff, that revitalization will magically appear somehow. So, they're trusting the future of their community or their region or their nation to magic.
Yeah. From a revitalization perspective, can you give an example of how would you do this if you are a consultant? Let's say I'm the mayor of a smaller city. Let's say 100,000 people living in that city is not too small, but still small. How would you, they say, hey, we need to revitalize, we need to figure out how that works. Storm, can you help us? How would you go about?
Well, basically, I teach them a minimum viable process. The absolute minimum things they have to have in place if they're going to have any reasonable chance of success in their efforts. And the fact is that most places, the mayor will make all these wild promises about how they're going to revitalize the community, but the mayor has no qualifications whatsoever to make such a promise. And as a result, it usually ends up just being a campaign promise with, doesn't result in any kind of, anything close to what they promised. So what they usually do is they dive straight into projects. They're in a kind of reactive mode where they wait for a private real estate developer to come along and propose cleaning up this old industrial area and redeveloping it, or adaptively reusing an old building, all these sorts of things. So they're just reacting and creating projects. So what I would do, or what one of our revitalization and resilience facilitators would do after getting certified, is they would show them, look, there's a very basic process here where you can, instead of jumping right into projects, you need to create an ongoing program. If you don't have an ongoing program of regeneration, revitalization, you're not going to achieve it, because it's not something you just do reactively whenever you get into trouble. If you want to have a healthy community, you need to be constantly regenerating, just like our own bodies. The only reason we're able to maintain our health is because our bodies are constantly regenerating and replacing components and cells. And cities are the same way. So you create an ongoing program. First thing you do once you've got your program going is you create a vision. That's a cohesive set of goals of what you want to achieve. And once you've got your vision, you need to create a strategy. And this is one place they all fail, is that everybody loves to use the word strategy, but very few people know what it is. The only purpose of a strategy is to achieve success. It's the only reason for existing. But I ask these mayors, well, what's your strategy? And they'll say, oh, here we go. They'll reach up onto a shelf and pull down a 300-page comprehensive plan and say, there it is. I say, no, Mr. Mayor, that's a plan. What's your strategy? And they'll say, oh, yeah, okay, well, our strategy is to create a high quality of life that attracts new residents and employers and investors. And I'll say, no, that's a vision. Now, that's what you want to achieve. What's your strategy for overcoming the obstacles to achieving that vision? And it's usually at that point they get kind of frustrated and say, okay, I give up. What's the strategy? So, so after you get a strategy, the next thing they have to do is work on their policies to make sure that their policies locally are not undermining what they've said they want to achieve, which they usually are, because a lot of policies have been in place for a century or more. And that next thing they have to do before they can actually launch any projects is create partnerships, because that's what brings in the resources you need to actually do things. So you could public-public partnerships, public-private partnerships, private-private partnerships. And then finally, when you got all that, then you can start doing the actual actions, the projects, which are the tactics that go along with the strategy. And that's your minimum viable process right there. But the secret sauce that makes all of the regenerative magic happen is that each one of those 6 elements, the program, the vision, the strategy, the policies, the partnerships, and the projects, each one of them needs to be regenerative in nature.
Right.
Only then will it produce revitalization and resilience.
How is it from a community engagement? Do you then as well help them to engage the local community, or do you step back when you have helped them with getting these topics in order?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the engaging local stakeholders has been one of the big battle cries of community revitalization over the last decade or so. Problem is that most people just kind of do it blindly. They don't really realize that there are certain parts of the process where community stakeholder engagement is really essential. But there are other parts of the project process where stakeholder engagement can actually sabotage what you're doing. So the place you want it maximally is in the creation of your shared vision. You know, if you really do a good job of creating a shared vision of what the community wants and engage all the stakeholders in it, you know, and you're inclusive, you know, of all, you know, races and, you know, income levels, and, you know, so it's a true community shared vision. And then you create a strategy and a program and policies to support that vision. You don't really need that much stakeholder engagement after that, because it's all captured in the vision. So as long as the vision is really driving everything that happens after that, you don't really need it. And the fact is that if you suddenly do, let's say you launch a new project and you just automatically create a stakeholder engagement process, you can sabotage the whole project there. Because private redevelopers are usually working on borrowed money. You know, they've got interest piling up. And if you suddenly start bringing in all these stakeholders once the project's been launched, it can delay it for months, might even end up in the project being canceled. So do it up front in your program and your vision, so that the project can move forward as expeditiously as possible.
So before we go into certification, because I'm really interested from one thing is from an entrepreneurial spirit as well from an innovation spirit, I would like to look a little bit on how do you see that moving and evolving from an innovation aspect? So community engagement and community restoration, how is that evolving, and how has that been evolving over the last years?
Yeah, the primary innovation from the standpoint of reinventing a community, that effort's really going to go into the visioning process. And it should be, I should point out, visioning isn't just a matter of getting a bunch of people together to daydream about what their ideal community might look like in the future. A good visioning process is based on research. You need to learn what's causing the problems that we have right now. You need to do an asset map so you understand what physical assets you have to work with. And then you can actually start putting together a cohesive vision of what a revitalized, redeveloped, regenerated future might look like. The other area of the innovation is simply having that process, because the funny thing is that instinctively everybody knows you need a process to produce something. So every community I've gone to always has some of those elements, those 6 elements. You know, you'll usually find a vision. They've usually gone through a visioning exercise. You'll always find projects. That's just kind of the automatic thing people dive into. But since nobody's ever presented the leaders with a template before, and said, look, here's your minimum viable process. You got to have these 6 elements to actually have an effective revitalization and resilience program, then what usually happens is they'll get satisfied with having 2 or 3 or 4 of the elements and think that they've got a complete process when they don't, because they don't have anything to compare it to. And a process that's missing key elements is not a process. It simply won't work.
Yeah. Just got one of the things thinking from my past is, when you work with large property developers, they're trying often to design one thing and then copy paste it to other cities, to other countries, which might work but might not work. What is your opinion on these things where, hey, there's someone who has seen something and just pushing it in a local community or development, which might not fit?
Yeah, well, having this process, having that shared vision, having this ongoing program is what gives communities more control over their future. Because especially in this country, you've actually got a better situation over in Germany, because your tradition over there is for a community. If a community needs to expand, if they want to grow their population, the tradition is for the community to decide up front where that expansion is going to take place.
Yeah.
And then you put out your RFPs, or whatever you call them over there, request for proposal, and get private redevelopers to bid, saying, okay, there's the property you said is available. Here's what we can do there. And then they choose the best proposal. Over here in the States, it's the Wild West. I mean, in most communities don't have a vision. They don't have a strategy. They don't have a program. They don't have any effective way of engaging all their stakeholders. They really don't know what they want. So they just sit around waiting for private redevelopers or developers, sprawl developers, big box stores, to come in and say, this is what we want to do. And since they've got no standards to measure it against, they just say, okay, go ahead. And so they basically are making themselves victims of private developers who don't always have the community's best interest in mind.
Yeah. From certification. So you have developed a certification to enable others to do what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the certification is mostly based, at least the initial part of the certification is based on my 3 books. Which totals over 1,000 pages. So it's not a small course, but you can take it at whatever pace you want, however long it takes you to read 3 books, and then to take the tests. There are 750 questions in the series of tests, and you can take those tests over whatever period you want. I've had some people just dive into it and get themselves certified in a month. And other people have taken a year or more to do it. So it doesn't really matter what timetable you're on. And so that's the first part. Then there's also continuing education based on podcasts and videos that is just an ongoing sort of situation. But all kinds of people are getting certified. Some people, there's a woman in Switzerland who's getting certified, and she's mostly focused in natural resource restoration. There's an attorney down in Florida who spent the last 20 years as an attorney and got totally burned out and was not enjoying how he earned a living, and decided to spend the rest of his life improving places. And he got certified as a revitalization and resilience facilitator, and is now using, to some degree, his legal skills, but to a larger degree, his new skills as what we call a refacilitator for short, revitalization and resilience facilitator. And he's now on the board of directors of one of the largest natural resource restoration projects in the United States.
That's great. How do you think it's also an opportunity for large corporations who still have big property arms and big redevelopment and development arms? That's, for example, the world where I come from. Would that be interesting for corporates in the same way?
Yeah, very much, from several standpoints. One is that, like I mentioned before, there's trillions of dollars of contracts being let every year in natural resource restoration and urban redevelopment, and it's growing very, very quickly. So one opportunity for corporations is simply to get into this business. If they're large enough, they can do it through acquisition. There are lots of companies that have been growing very quickly that are looking for acquisitions to move up to the next level. I'm working with a giant global engineering firm right now with over 50,000 employees who wants to, they've been doing tons of individual engineering projects around the planet for decades. But what they want to do now is start providing more of a complete solution for communities. Not just doing individual projects, but actually doing entire revitalization initiatives. And to do that, they have to understand how you actually turn projects into revitalization. And very few of these large engineering firms really know how to do that. And the other way they can do it is with their own assets. A lot of these giant companies have large amounts of land. They've got derelict buildings. They've got contaminated properties. And the problem is that in many cases, they've got them on the books as assets, but because of the cost of cleaning them up, they're really liabilities, and they become what's known as stranded assets. So they don't know what to do with them. In many cases, they don't even bother doing assessments. They don't bring anybody in to find out how contaminated the property is, because as soon as they know about the contamination, the property becomes a liability.
Yeah.
So they'd
it's
rather
better not to know.
Yeah, they don't want to know. So the innovation here, the opportunity is for these companies to actually learn how to revitalize places, because in many cases it might not make sense economically just to clean up a heavily contaminated property. The payoff in what they can sell that property for after they decontaminate it might not be enough to pay for all that decontamination.
Yeah.
But if they make it part of an overall revitalization effort for the area around the property, now that the cleanup of that property could become a key element in that revitalization strategy. And the revitalization of the properties around that one makes that property more valuable. So you get a synergistic effect.
Yeah, love that. And that's then as well. I mean, if you think corporate world, that's then, hey, this is an opportunity to rebrand you in a different way. Mm-hmm. And yes, that costs money, but it's giving something good to the community. So it will be paid back over time, definitely.
Yeah, and if you do it right, it's not a cost, it's an investment.
Exactly. Yeah, love that. So I have one question where it's a little bit broader. So how do you see, and how do you encourage leaders of large organizations, of cities, of countries even, to think different in this way? How would you encourage them to kind of innovate their thinking?
It's usually not done at the leader level. It's usually somebody within that leader's cabinet or their network of friends who will bring the good ideas to them and who end up being responsible for making things happen. The elected leader that's in the public eye is usually just the person who takes credit for it. So if you really want to innovate, you need to find the key people within their administration to make it happen, because they want to rise up. So if you bring them a great idea that can make them a star, they've got an interest in doing it too. I had an example like that in Montana back about 15 years ago, a little over 15 years ago. And a person at another organization, a regional organization, read my first book, The Restoration Economy, and he knew that the governor of Montana at the time was looking for ways to innovate, to come up with new creative ways of growing the Montana economy. So he said, why don't you create, I just read this book, The Restoration Economy, why don't you create a Montana restoration economy? And so the governor said, yeah, that sounds great. Go ahead and do it. So those people brought me in to help them create the initiative and launch it. It was quite successful. 3 years later, they published what was probably the world's first report that actually documented the return on investment of dollars. That they showed every dollar they put into restoring Montana was creating over 31 high-paying jobs, and was creating over $4.50 of return for every dollar put in. And that was the first time that restoration was actually, the ROI was actually documented. So it was a very successful initiative. But if I had gone to the governor himself, I probably wouldn't have even been able to get him on the phone.
Yeah.
So you got to start lower.
Love that example, because that also shows that there is not just the environmental and the community benefit, it's also an economical benefit. And I think that's a trigger where I believe very strongly in that companies, if they see, hey, there's a business opportunity in something and doing something good, they can jump on it because it's helping them to grow, it's helping them to do something good in the same way, and brings return on investment, which is from a corporate standpoint always the goal they want to reach. And I think that's where we need to go more in, where how do we enable businesses to do the right thing and earning money with the right thing, not doing something that's not the right thing, specifically in the environmental areas.
Yep.
So moving to the last part of the podcast, where I ask a couple of more rapid fire questions. If you would have the chance to be part of a project, leading a project that's impacting every human being on Earth, what project would it be and why would you choose it?
Climate restoration. Too many people focused on, zero carbon these days or low carbon, and that's good. But that's like what I was saying about sustainable development. That's simply destroying the world at a slower pace.
Yeah.
If we want to really have a brighter future, we need to focus on climate restoration. And adapting to climate change is important too, because we've already reached a point where it's going to get worse before it gets better, no matter what we do. So climate adaptation is a key part of community regeneration these days. But if I were going to focus on one thing, it would be restoring the climate, which means carbon negative, big time carbon negative, that everything we do, needs to be focusing on sucking more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting in.
Yeah, that's a great one. Next question. Where will you be in a year from now, as a person and as a business person as well?
Well, I haven't really told anybody about this yet, but my wife and I are seriously considering moving to Panama.
Oh,
yeah, my wife is from Mexico originally, so Mexico's a possibility as well. There are many places in Mexico that we love, but we really love Panama. So yeah, we could be there a year from now.
interesting. And from a business perspective?
I'm pretty much at the point that I've been shooting for a long time, thanks to, I hate to say thanks to, but as a result of the COVID crisis, I actually got started on this before COVID hit, was shifting everything I do online. So creating RECONOMICS Institute at reconomics.org was kind of the cherry on the cake. The last step that I needed to put in place in order to make it possible for my wife and I to live anywhere and continue what I'm doing for a living.
Yeah. How do you keep yourself informed and up to date on different topics?
That's kind of automatic as a result of the other thing that I haven't mentioned is that the journal of the RECONOMICS Institute is revitalization at revitalization.org. So every 2 weeks on the 1st and the 15th of the month, a new issue of revitalization comes out. There are about 149 issues out right now with a total of almost 8,500 articles. And I create revitalization myself. So it's a major part of every day is adding articles to the next issue of revitalization. So the process of researching articles about nature restoration, community revitalization, climate resilience and adaptation, that automatically keeps me informed of basically everything that's going on that starts with RE.
So you're gathering the best articles, the most valuable ones, and put them into your world, if I understand you right.
Well, there's original stuff there too. We get guest articles from the people I work with all around the world. I write editorials sometimes myself, and even when we're simply reusing a press release, for instance, we'll always add new stuff to it. We don't just publish press releases as they are.
Yeah.
We use them as a learning tool.
That's great. Where can people find you? How can people reach out to you?
Probably the easiest thing to do would just be to go to my public speaking site, stormcunningham.com, and the links to everything else I do are on that. The links to my books, the links to Revitalization, the magazine, links to RECONOMICS Institute. It's all at stormcunningham.com.
Yeah, good. It was a pleasure talking to you, Storm, and thank you for doing an early podcast, at least on your end of the world. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and looking forward to see more projects and more initiatives from you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jens. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. You will find the links and resources in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, the most impactful thing you can do is subscribing to the show on any of the podcasting platforms and give me a review. This will help me to reach more innovators around the world and bring some of you into the show. If you have any question to the guest or want to engage with me, feel free to reach out to me on my public WhatsApp at +49 151 7033 1176. I will repeat, +49 151 7033 1176. It's all WhatsApp, texting only. Or follow me on social media and contact me there. And finally, if you look for someone educating you or your team on innovation culture coaching, have a look at heitlandinnovation.com. Thanks, and see you in the next episode.